The Street Jude's executive wing had never seen terror like this. 18 of the world's most decorated physicians crowded into a private medical suite that cost more than a small hospital. Their white coats blurred under harsh fluorescent lights that had been dimmed for privacy but now blazed with emergency. Heart monitors screamed. Ventilators hissed like dying snakes. A team from Johns Hopkins barked orders at specialists, flown in from Berlin, while a renowned pediatric cardiologist wiped sweat from his forehead and whispered what no one dared to say out loud. "We're losing him." Baby Santino Caruso, heir to an empire built on fear and blood money, was dying. And $75,000 an hour in medical expertise couldn't tell anyone why. His tiny body had turned the color of death itself, blue lips, blue fingernails, a strange pallor creeping across his skin like an accusation from God. Every test came back inconclusive. Every treatment failed. And through the reinforced glass window, watching from the hallway where he'd been mopping floors since 6 a.m., stood Elijah Brooks, 13 years old, son of nobody, wearing shoes held together with duct tape and a jacket 2 sizes too small. He'd spent his whole life being invisible in places like this, the boy who cleaned up after the important people, who noticed everything because no one ever noticed him. Right now, he was staring at the peace lily on the medical cart, the one that had arrived this morning in a pristine white box with no card. The one that had left a faint crystalline residue on the nurse's gloves that had touched the baby's oxygen mask during the last shift change. The one that every genius in that room had walked past 23 times without a second glance. Elijah's hands trembled. He knew what it was. His grandmother, who'd healed half the neighborhood with nothing but herbs and prayers before she died, had taught him to recognize that leaf pattern, that particular sheen on the soil. Aconitum. Wolf's bane. Devil's breath. The kind of plant you sent when you wanted someone to die slowly, mysteriously, with no trace in the blood. The doctors were about to open that baby's chest, looking for answers inside his body. The answer was sitting 3 feet away, wrapped in expensive paper and a death wish. Elijah looked at the armed guards flanking the door. Then, at his mother, Aisha. Across the hall, the woman who'd warned him 1,000 times, "Stay invisible, stay safe. Don't give them a reason to remember we exist." He thought about what would happen if he was wrong. Then he thought about what would happen if he was right and did nothing. Elijah dropped his mop, pulled his jacket tight, and moved. What would you risk to save a life that the world says isn't your business to save? Elijah Brooks had learned to walk without making a sound by the time he was 7 years old. It wasn't a skill anyone had taught him. It was survival. When you lived in the kind of neighborhood where gunshots were background music and eviction notices were as regular as birthday cards, you learned quickly that invisibility was armor. You learned to move like shadow, to breathe like silence, to become so small, so quiet, so utterly forgettable that the dangerous people floating through their violent lives never had to be inconvenienced by noticing you were alive. His mother, Aisha Carter, had worked 3 jobs for as long as Elijah could remember. She'd cleaned office buildings at dawn, hospitals at noon, and luxury apartments at night, scrubbing floors on her hands and knees, while people in $1,000 shoes stepped over her like she was furniture. She'd worked through pneumonia, through a car accident that left her with a permanent limp, through the slow death of every dream she'd ever had for herself. Also, Elijah could have a roof that didn't leak, and food that wasn't expired. "We are blessed," she would tell him every night, her voice soft with exhaustion and something that might have been faith or might have been denial. "We're alive. We're together. We are blessed, Elijah. Don't ever forget that." Elijah never argued with her, but he also never forgot the way security guards followed him through stores like he was already guilty. He never forgot the time a teacher had praised his essay, then asked if he'd copied it from somewhere. He never forgot the unspoken rule of his existence. Your presence is tolerated, not wanted. Don't give them a reason. Blessed, sure. If you squinted hard enough and ignored everything else, If you're already hooked on Elijah's story, you won't want to miss what happens next. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single chapter of this journey. Dominic Caruso's world sprawled across the city like a cancer with expensive taste. There were legitimate businesses, construction companies, waste management contracts, restaurant chains, and beneath them, the real empire. Loan sharking, extortion, drug distribution networks that moved product through 3 states, protection rackets so efficient they ran themselves. He owned judges, cops, councilmen. He owned silence. The Caruso family had built their kingdom on a simple principle. Fear is more reliable than loyalty, and loyalty purchased with fear is the strongest currency on earth. Dominic knew every corner of his territory, not because he'd ever walked the streets himself. God, no, he knew it because he'd spent his entire life taking it, piece by piece, block by block, from men who'd underestimated him. He mapped the city in his mind the way generals mapped battlefields. He knew which politicians could be bought and which had to be blackmailed. He knew which rival families were weak and which needed to be reminded why the Caruso name meant something. He knew these things because knowing them gave him power in a world built on violence and respect. But lately, Dominic had been watching something he couldn't control. 3 months ago, his wife had given birth to a son, Santino Michael Caruso, the heir, the prince, the future of a dynasty built on broken bones and buried secrets. The baby had arrived in a flurry of champagne toasts and expensive cigars. A pediatrician had been purchased, not hired, purchased to be on call 24/7. The nursery had been swept for bugs 3 times. A rotation of trusted guards monitored the halls. Dominic had watched it all from his usual place, in control, and somewhere along the way, something had shifted in his chest. He'd started canceling meetings to hold his son during feeding time. He'd started feeling something he couldn't quite name, a strange, terrifying tenderness for this tiny person who made him feel more vulnerable than any bullet ever had. Maybe it was because Santino was innocent. Maybe it was because Dominic remembered what his own father used to say. A man who can't protect his family is no man at all. Or maybe it was because Dominic understood in some bone-deep way that all his power meant nothing if he couldn't keep this one small thing safe. This story is about to take a turn you won't see coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you can follow every twist. Hit that subscribe button now. It was a Tuesday morning when the plant arrived. Dominic was in his office reviewing protection payment ledgers when Marco, his second-in-command, brought in the delivery notice. "Boss, package came for the baby. Courier said it's from the Vitale family. Peace offering after the misunderstanding last month." Dominic frowned. The misunderstanding had been a Vitale lieutenant skimming from a joint operation. The resolution had involved a shallow grave in Jersey. But the Vitale patriarch had bent the knee, paid tribute, sworn loyalty. It made sense they'd send a gift. What is it? Some kind of plant. Fancy thing. Card says, "For the new prince." Dominic nodded. "Have it checked. Then put it in the nursery with the other stuff." The plant was beautiful, Marco had to admit, as he carried it through the private medical wing later that afternoon. About 2 feet tall, with dark green leaves that seemed to shimmer under the lights. White flowers with purple streaks hung in delicate clusters. The pot was wrapped in silk ribbon, and a card was tucked among the stems. "May he grow strong." The nurse on duty, a woman named Patricia, who'd been cleared through 6 background checks, signed for it. As she moved it to the medical cart near the baby's incubator, her gloved fingers brushed the leaves. They came away with a faint residue, crystalline, almost like sugar, but with a strange, oily texture. Patricia noticed it, frowned at her glove. But then the phone rang with a lab result, and the moment passed. She set the plant down, washed her hands, and went back to monitoring Santino's vitals. And across the hall, wiping down baseboards with industrial cleaner, Elijah Brooks saw everything. He saw the plant. He saw the residue. He saw the nurse touch her face with that same glove before washing her hands. And something his grandmother had taught him, some warning from childhood summers in her kitchen, began screaming in his mind. He knew that plant. He couldn't remember from where, not exactly. But something about those leaves, those flowers, that crystalline dust, it pulled at a memory buried deep. His grandmother's voice, maybe from those afternoons, she'd made him memorize plant names while she cooked. This one's beautiful, baby, but beauty can kill. The devil always wraps poison in something pretty. Elijah stood there for a long moment, that unease growing heavier with every breath. He thought about telling someone. He thought about knocking on the security station and explaining that something about that plant felt wrong. But who would listen to him? He was nobody. The cleaning lady's kid, a shadow. He didn't even exist in this world except as something to step around. So Elijah did what he always did. He swallowed his instincts, buried his unease, and went back to his mop bucket. 3 days later, he would realize that decision almost cost a baby his life. What Elijah discovers next will change everything. Subscribe now and be the first to find out what happens when the unthinkable becomes the only option. The alarms came at 4:47 a.m. Elijah was asleep on the apartment couch when he heard them, distant at first, then growing louder, closer, more urgent. Police sirens, ambulance sirens, sounds that usually meant his neighborhood was having another bad night. But these weren't coming from the streets. They were coming from Street Jude's hospital, where his mother was working the overnight shift. His phone buzzed. A text from Aisha. "Get here now. Emergency. Bring your grandmother's plant book." Elijah's blood turned to ice. He grabbed the old journal, the one with dried leaves pressed between pages, the one filled with his grandmother's handwriting and warnings, and ran. The hospital had transformed into a war zone. Through the emergency entrance, past the security guards who were too distracted to stop a running kid, up 3 flights of stairs because the elevators were jammed with medical personnel. Elijah burst into the executive wing and froze. The hallway was chaos. Doctors everywhere, equipment he couldn't name, people shouting in medical jargon he didn't understand. And through the window of the private suite he could see it all. Baby Santino Caruso, tiny and helpless, the color of death, blue lips, blue fingernails, a rash spreading across his skin like spilled ink. Tubes and wires covering his small body, monitors screaming, and surrounding him, 18 of the world's greatest doctors, moving with frantic precision and accomplishing nothing. If this story is gripping your heart, you need to subscribe right now. What happens next will stay with you forever. The doctors had started arriving within an hour of the first code blue. Elijah pressed himself against the wall and watched them come. Black cars and helicopters depositing an army of medical royalty. He'd heard the nurses whispering their names in terrified awe. Dr. Heinrich Voss, from Berlin, the man who'd saved the German chancellor's grandchild. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo, the neurologist with a 6-month waiting list. Dr. Michael Sterling from Johns Hopkins, the cardiologist, who charged more for a consultation than Elijah's mother made in a year. Dr. Amara Chen, Dr. Samuel Rodriguez, Dr. Isabella Wolf, Dr. Marcus Okonkwo. 18 of them. 18 of the greatest medical minds on the planet. Each one carrying degrees from institutions Elijah had only seen in movies. Each one armed with knowledge that had taken decades and millions of dollars to acquire. 18 experts, and not a single answer. Elijah could see them through the glass, arguing now. Dr. Voss was gesturing emphatically at a chart while Dr. Sterling shook his head. Dr. Tanaka had stepped back from the group, her face troubled. A younger doctor was running yet another blood test, while a nurse changed yet another IV bag. They were lost. Elijah could see it in their body language, in the way their confident postures had begun to crumble as the hours passed. These titans of medicine, these gods of the healing arts, were standing in a multi-million-dollar medical suite with every resource on earth at their disposal, and they had no idea why a 3-month-old baby was dying in front of them. Dominic Caruso stood in the corner of the room, and Elijah had never seen a man look so broken. The Mafia boss who commanded armies of soldiers, who crushed enemies and moved through the world like death itself, was clutching his wife's hand with white-knuckled desperation. His expensive suit was rumpled. His face was gray. His eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that Elijah had seen in news reports and crime documentaries, were red-rimmed and desperate. Their baby was dying, and all their power couldn't save him. This is the moment everything changes. Subscribe now. You'll only see what happens next if you're part of this journey. Elijah watched the doctors cycle through their theories, like gamers trying different weapons that wouldn't work. Bacterial infection. They pumped Santino full of antibiotics that did nothing. Viral inflammation. They tried antivirals that made no difference. Autoimmune response. They administered immunosuppressants that didn't suppress anything. Genetic disorder. They ran DNA sequencing that came back perfect. Allergic reaction. They shot him with epinephrine that might as well have been water. Cardiac arrhythmia. They tried every medication protocol in the book. Nothing changed the rhythm. Each theory emerged with confidence and collapsed in confusion. Each treatment was administered with precision and failed with cruelty. The machines kept screaming, the baby kept dying, and the experts kept failing. Elijah watched it all from his position in the hallway, his hands pressed against the cold wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. Because he knew something they didn't. He knew about the plant. It was still there. He could see it from where he stood. Sitting on the medical cart, right next to the incubator, its white flowers catching the harsh lights, its dark leaves shimmering with that telltale sheen. The doctors walked past it constantly. They adjusted equipment around it. They set their tablets and coffee cups and medical charts down next to it without a second glance. It was invisible to them, part of the background. Just like him, Elijah remembered his grandmother's lessons now, the memories surfacing with painful clarity. They'd been sitting in her kitchen, and she'd been showing him pictures in that old journal, the one now burning a hole in his backpack. "This one here," she'd said, pointing to a dried leaf that looked almost exactly like the ones on that cart. "We call it wolf's bane. The fancy doctors call it aconitum. Beautiful, yes? But the dust on those leaves, baby just breathing it wrong can stop a heart. And if someone grinds it fine, puts it where a baby might breathe it in." She'd shaken her head, her face grave. "The poison don't show up in regular blood tests. It works on the heart's electricity, you understand? Makes it flutter and stop, flutter and stop. Doctors think it's the heart failing. They never think to look for the plant." Elijah's hands were shaking now. His mother appeared beside him, her cleaning uniform soaked with sweat from running through the hospital. "Baby, what did you need the book for?" Elijah pointed at the plant through the window. "Mama, look." Aisha followed his finger. She saw the plant. She saw the doctors ignoring it. She saw the baby dying. And then she saw the crystalline residue on the leaves, the same residue on the nurse's discarded gloves in the biohazard bin. "Oh, God," Aisha whispered. "Oh, God, Elijah, you're sure? Grandma's book has the picture. It's the same one. Mama, they don't see it. They're not looking for poison because rich people don't get poisoned by flowers, right? They get sick from diseases with big names." They stood there together, mother and son, invisible people watching powerful people fail. The experts inside were trying to save the baby's life with their expertise, and the answer was 3 feet away, wrapped in silk ribbon and a murder plot. "What do we do?" Aisha asked, her voice breaking. "Baby, if you're wrong, they'll destroy us. Caruso will think we're trying to hurt his son. We'll disappear. You understand? We'll disappear." Elijah looked at his mother, then at the dying baby, then at the 18 doctors who couldn't see what was right in front of them. "And if I'm right and I don't say anything," Elijah said quietly, "that baby dies. And I'll spend my whole life knowing I could have saved him but didn't because I was scared." He looked at his grandmother's journal in his hands, at the pressed leaves and careful warnings written in the shaky handwriting of a woman who'd spent her life helping people with nothing but knowledge and courage. Grandma wouldn't have stayed quiet, Elijah said. Aisha Carter closed her eyes. She thought about their apartment, about their survival, about the 1,000 ways this could go wrong. Then she thought about the baby's blue lips and the mother's broken sobs echoing through the glass. She thought about what kind of man she wanted her son to become. Then we don't stay quiet either, Aisha said. She took her son's hand. Together, they walked toward the security guard blocking the entrance to the private suite, toward the armed men who worked for a killer, toward the experts who would see them as ignorant, as intrusive, as dangerously out of place, toward the moment when everything would change. Elijah has seen something the doctors haven't. But will anyone listen to a poor black boy from the margins? Subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. This is where the story truly begins. The security guard's hand went to his holster the moment Elijah and Aisha approached. Back up. No unauthorized personnel. Please, Aisha said, her voice steady despite the terror flooding her veins. My son needs to speak to one of the doctors. It's about the baby. It's important. Lady, I said back up. Inside the suite, Dr. Sterling was preparing a scalpel. They were going to open Santino's chest, search for structural defects that didn't exist. Elijah could see it happening through the glass, could see the countdown to a surgery that would kill the baby while the real poison sat 3 feet away, still invisible. He ducked under the guard's arm and ran. Hey, stop. Elijah burst through the door, his grandmother's journal clutched against his chest. The room went silent. 18 pairs of eyes turned toward him, this small, poor, black boy in second-hand clothes, invading their sterile space of expertise and desperation. Dr. Voss stepped forward, his face twisted with fury. Who the hell get this child out of here? The plant, Elijah gasped, pointing at the peace lily. It's Wolfsbane aconitum, the dust on the leaves. He's been breathing it. It's stopping his heart. Security, Dr. Sterling barked. Elijah tried to push forward, tried to show them the journal, his grandmother's drawings, the pressed leaves that matched exactly. But Doctor, Tanaka grabbed his shoulder, her grip iron strong. You're contaminating a sterile environment. You need to leave, now. Please, just look the residue on the leaves. It's aconitine. It doesn't show up in regular blood work. It affects the sodium channels in the heart. Dr. Voss laughed, a harsh sound without humor. You're telling me about sodium channels? Get him out. The guards were coming. Elijah could hear their boots pounding across the tile. He looked desperately at Dominic Caruso, at the man whose reputation was built on seeing threats others missed. Mr. Caruso, please. That plant came from someone who wants your son dead. Dominic's eyes flickered to the peace lily. For one heartbeat, Elijah thought he saw recognition, calculation, the mind of a survivor, processing a possibility everyone else was dismissing. But then, Doctor, Sterling stepped between them. Mr. Caruso, this child is delaying critical care. We need to operate now. The guards grabbed Elijah's arms. He fought, trying to break free, trying to reach the plant, trying to make them see. You're killing him. You're looking in the wrong place. Then, Aisha's mop bucket crashed to the floor with a sound like thunder. Water and industrial cleaner flooded across the tile. The nearest doctor slipped, grabbing a medical cart for balance. The cart rolled. Equipment clattered. And, in the chaos, Elijah tore free from the guards and lunged not away from the room, but toward the bassinet where Santino lay dying. No! Dominic roared. 3 guards drew their weapons. The doctors screamed. But Elijah was already there, his hands reaching not for the baby, but for the peace lily. He grabbed it, threw it against the far wall where it shattered, soil and poisoned leaves scattering across sterile white tile. Then he turned to Santino. The baby was barely breathing, his lips the color of twilight. Elijah had seconds, maybe less. He remembered his grandmother's hands, firm and certain, remembered her voice explaining the old ways when modern medicine was too expensive or too far away, remembered what she'd done once when a neighbor's child had inhaled kerosene fumes. Dr. Tanaka lunged forward. Don't touch him. But Elijah was already lifting Santino from the bassinet with shaking hands, already turning the baby face down across his forearm, supporting the small head with his palm. The doctors were shouting. The guards had their guns aimed at his head. Dominic was screaming something in Italian that sounded like a death sentence. And Elijah, this poor boy from nowhere, did the unthinkable. He struck Santino between the shoulder blades with the heel of his hand, firm, precise, the way his grandmother had taught him. Once, twice, 3 times. The baby's small body jerked with each impact. "He's killing him!" Dr. Sterling shouted. "Someone stop him!" 4 more strikes, each one measured, each one an act of desperate faith. The monitors were screaming. Aisha was crying. The guards had their fingers on triggers. And then Santino coughed. It was a small sound, barely audible over the chaos. But it was followed by another cough. This one stronger, more violent. The baby's body convulsed, and from his tiny mouth came a spray of something crystalline and wrong, the residue, the poison dust he'd been breathing for 3 days, now expelled from his airways in one harsh, brutal, beautiful purge. Santino gasped. A real breath this time, deep and rattling and alive. His chest expanded. The blue began to fade from his lips like ice melting under sun. The monitors, which had been screaming death, shifted their rhythm. Beep, 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 regular, strong, impossibly, miraculously strong. The room went silent. Dr. Voss was frozen with his scalpel in his hand. Dr. Tanaka had her mouth open, no words coming out. 18 of the world's greatest minds stood paralyzed, watching a 13-year-old boy cradle a baby who should have been dead. Elijah looked up at Dominic Caruso, this man who could order deaths with a whisper, who commanded an empire of fear. Tears were streaming down the Mafia boss's face. "He's breathing," Dominic whispered. "He's breathing." Hit the like button and subscribe for the heart-pounding climax. You won't believe what happens when the most powerful man in the city realizes a poor boy just saved his entire world. The silence that followed was the kind that changes worlds. Santino Caruso's chest hitched once, twice, then expanded with a gasping breath that sounded like resurrection itself. The blue began to fade from his lips like watercolor washing away in rain. His fingernails shifted from indigo to pink. The rash that had spread across his skin like a bruise began to pale, receding inch by inch, as if time itself was rewinding. The heart monitor, which had been stuttering its way toward flatline for the past 6 hours, suddenly found its rhythm. Beep, 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 steady, strong, alive. The 18 doctors stood frozen, their expensive educations rendered useless in a single moment. Dr. Voss's mouth hung open. Dr. Sterling had dropped his tablet. Dr. Tanaka was staring at Elijah like he'd just walked through a wall. The younger residents looked between the baby and the boy, trying to reconcile what their training said was impossible with what their eyes could see was real. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the steady beep of a heartbeat that shouldn't exist, and the ragged breathing of a 13-year-old kid who'd just saved a life no one thought could be saved. Dominic Caruso broke first. The man who commanded armies, who'd built an empire on fear and violence, who'd never bent to any authority in his life, dropped to his knees on the hospital floor, not to pray, not to thank God, but to look Elijah Brooks directly in the eye. "You," Dominic said, his voice raw and broken. "You saw it. When all of them," he gestured at the doctors without looking away from Elijah, "when all their degrees and their machines and their expertise saw nothing, you saw it." Elijah met his gaze. This close, he could see that Dominic Caruso's eyes weren't cold at all. They were desperate, human, grateful in a way that transcended words. "My grandmother taught me to see what others don't, sir," Elijah said quietly. Dominic's jaw worked. He glanced at his son, now breathing steadily in the incubator, then back at the boy who'd saved him. "I own this city," he said. "I own judges, politicians, police. I own silence and fear and loyalty purchased with both. He paused. But I don't own what you have. I can't buy what you know. And I sure as hell can't protect what I love without people like you willing to risk everything to tell the truth. He stood slowly, then did something that made every guard in the room tense. He extended his hand to Elijah. Not a dismissal, not a payment, an acknowledgement between equals. Alia shook it. Dominic turned to Aisha, who'd been standing behind her son like a shield made of courage and prayers. Mrs. Carter, your son just gave me back my world. That's a debt I'll carry until I die. And in my world, debts like that mean something. He paused. No one touches you. No one touches your family. You need something. You call me. You need protection. You have mine. You need opportunity. It's yours. That's a promise that doesn't expire. Aisha nodded, tears streaming down her face, unable to speak. An hour later, as sunrise broke over the city, Elijah and Aisha walked out of St. Jude's hospital through the main entrance. Not the service entrance, not the side door. The main entrance, where important people walked. Security guards who would have stopped them yesterday nodded with respect. Nurses who would have looked through them smiled and said thank you. They were no longer invisible. Aisha squeezed her son's hand as they reached the parking lot. Your grandmother would be so proud, baby. Elijah looked back at the hospital, at the window where baby Santino was probably sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. She taught me good, Mama. That she did. Aisha smiled through her tears. That she did. They walked toward home together, no longer shadows in someone else's story, but the heroes of their own. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and like to help us share more tales of kindness and courage. Your support ensures that voices like Elijah's are never kept in the shadows. Thank you for listening.